Good evening and welcome. I'm David, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore. We're pleased to welcome Alex Pappademas and Joan Lemay to our At Home with Literati series in support of quantum criminals, ramblers, wild gamblers, and other soul survivors from the songs of Steely Dan. They'll be joined in conversation by Elizabeth Nelson. And now a quick webinar overview for all attendees. The chat is closed, but you can keep your chat window open as I'll be dropping links to purchase the book from Literati throughout the event. The Q&A is accessible, so please submit questions. Live transcription is available on your toolbar as well. And if you're watching us later on YouTube, links to purchase the book are in the description. You can also shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. Most of all, we'd like to thank you for your attendance this evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for being here. And now, Alex Pappademas is the author of Keanu Reeves' Most Triumphant, The Movies and Meaning of an Irrepressible Icon, and the writer and host of the acclaimed podcast, The Big Hit Show. His work has also appeared in GQ, The New York Times, and Grantland. Joan Lemay is an artist based in London and New York City, although the paintings for this book were created in Portland. Her work appears in multiple publications and books and has been shown in museums, galleries, and public spaces internationally. Elizabeth Nelson's writing has appeared in The Ringer, Oxford American, New York Times, Pitchfork, and LGNM. She's a singer-songwriter in the band Paranoid Style. And now, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. So, did you guys want me to just start launching questions at you? Is that okay?
Yeah.
We need to be led. We're at this point, I think yesterday I said to you outside of the WNYC thing, I was like, man, I understand now what it's like. You know, you're on the road. It's just, you know, you live your whole day for that 30 minutes on stage and then you don't know what to do with yourself. And you're like, we've been on tour for 36 hours.
36 hours. And we're both already losing our marbles in the best way, but also in a way where we're rambling and just overwhelmed. We've been overwhelmed and full of gratitude about everything that has been happening and everybody's kind words.
But I am fully at this point just held together by like caffeine and Campari, I think is all I've had for a couple of days. And so I'm a full Steely Dan character in that regard. But I mean, you're in a touring rock band, and it's just you were a writer, but you were also in a touring rock band. And like, what can you? We're gonna have to keep doing this. Like, what should we know as we continue? How do you not like go just, you know, as a person with a writerly temperament? How do you keep it together?
It's really, really hard, and I think that like, it basically disabuses you of every like rock and roll glory movie, like Almost Famous. No, it's Cocksucker Blues. I mean, that is the truest experience of the rock and roll tour life. Just tedium, anonymous hotel rooms, just being so bored, but also like completely wired and stuff after you perform. So yeah, I don't know. I you know, I hear pills are good, but I don't want to advocate for anything illicit, but you know, like, yeah, it sounds to me like you're having the full Steely Dan experience. So I think that you know, you'll come through it, you'll come out of it, and you'll be a working caricature for your next novel, How I Survived My Steely Dan Book Tour. And maybe understand better like how and why they decided to take the act off the road, which is something that we can discuss. So yeah, let's maybe get into it if you guys want to. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to do this. It's a huge honor. The book is amazing. So congratulations. It's beautiful. And I mean, Joan, it's one of the most graphically pleasing books I have ever experienced. And I think it's the perfect merger of your artwork with Alex's prose. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Anybody who has not bought it yet, I demand that you purchase a copy right now from Literati Books. So before we break into like the full-on nerd stuff that I know you guys really want to do, and we'll get there, I wanted to ask you, like, how did the two of you elect to work together, and what was that process like?
We have known each other. You do the math. I don't have the math skills.
I think
I'm going to throw it to you, but like
2000s, early 2000s.
Like I was the reviews editor at Spin Magazine when I was living in New York City, and I was working at Spin Magazine editing record reviews. And that was like 2001, 2002. And this was back in the day, that job involved publicists calling you on the telephone, which is now, I believe, among millennials, it's a felony, I think, to do that. Like you
get thrown not only in jail, you get thrown down a well.
Yes.
They find a well and they throw you down it, and they say, you can't call anybody from down there.
How dare you? Yeah, call me on you just text me to ask if it's okay to, which I now do too. It's like, hey, can I call you on the phone? That's like how we do it. But back then it was like literally like, hello, it's Joan Lemay from Hopper PR calling about like the fruit bats or whatever it was. Like, I mean, that was later, but I
was calling you about like the promise ring.
Right.
Yeah.
That's seriously, like first time around promise ring. And so we knew each other in that way. And like then when sort of social media came around, like at some point, like, but we had never actually met.
No.
And so I just knew you as a publicist that I'd worked with on things and like, and spin things. And then like social media comes around and like Instagram comes around, and I didn't know you were an artist until that happened. Mm-hmm. And then I had just been a fan of Joan's work for a long time. And then I'll do the fast version of this, which is like got the opportunity to do a music book for the UT Press American Music Series for our mutual friend Jessica Hopper, was the acquiring editor, and was basically like, what book would you want to write for UT if you could write any music book about anything? And like they've been just really killing it, doing amazing, like some of the best music books of the last few years, like Hanif's book about A Tribe Called Quest, Go Ahead in the Rain came out through there, and like there's a really amazing Sinead O'Connor book that's coming, like, or is happened, is
Lance Scott Walker's DJ Screw book.
Yeah, so it was like, it seemed really cool. But then I being myself spent a year and a half working on the book proposal, which you're not supposed to do. Like I was doing other things. I wasn't a solid year and a half, but I was just sort of could not figure out. Like I was going through the process of like, right, and I have a version of the proposal that they liked, I think, but I never really knew what it was. I didn't see it. I didn't know what it was going to be. And then Jessica and I both saw something on the internet. Our mutual friend Joan Lemay had posted, and now you go to your side of this.
So while all that was going on, excuse me, early pandemic, I'd gotten into starting to do fanzines again. Excuse me. I love having congestion and I'd made a couple of fanzines, and I had the idea to make a Steely Dan fanzine called Danzine, wherein I was going to draw not every named Steely Dan character, and also instances of I and we and me and all this stuff. And I made a spreadsheet, and it was hundreds and hundreds. And I like painting in series and working in series because it a lot of little things add up to a big thing. So I had just started that and posted about it on Instagram in a way to keep myself accountable, so that it wasn't just one of those ideas that you have and you don't actually flesh out. And then that was when Hopper and Alex saw it, and Jessica Hopper texted me and was like, "Joni, that's a book." And she, put us together.
I think I like saw it and got mad and was like, "That's a great rubric." And I don't know if we can swear on here, but I used a swear in the middle of that sentence in a text to Jessica. And I was like, oh, because I've been trying to figure out I just knew I had a million thoughts about Steely Dan, but I needed the organizing principle. And then once it was like, oh, it's a book that's organized, it's a book about Steely Dan. It's organized, not song by song or album by album or year by year, but character by character. And you jump around within that, and you just figure out a way to, whatever you have to say about them, you figure out different like ways to hang it on these like sort of little character shaped pegs. And once I had that,
so to speak.
Hey.
Then it was like 7 months, honestly, like the real serious writing. Like it was a real, like a kind of, it didn't, once I had it and knew what it was, like it didn't take as long. We're done faster than I was, which is a comment on my speed, I think, more than
or a comment on the mania with which I kind of attacked the project.
Yeah, this is very much a pandemic project.
It was very much
of us, like being locked in a room.
Yeah, it was very much
dissociating.
It was full dissociation, full like let me immerse myself in this. So the speed was maybe also because there was no, when you can't leave the house and you have a project, you do it up.
That's I mean, what a great way to spend your pandemic, diving into these characters. And so was a lot of the artwork kind of done already before you started writing, Alex, or were you guys trading ideas back and forth? Were you sending images, Joan, to Alex, and he would then send you text? It sounds like an incredible collaboration. So I'm just curious about the mechanics of it.
You hadn't done like much of it, and we were talking about this, right? You'd drawn like one or two things, like you painted Donald before, and so I knew I knew immediately once we started talking about what it was going to look like, because I'd seen that, which is an old painting. But I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be great. This is going to be great because that's a great painting of Donald. It's one of the most beautiful paintings of Donald Fagen I've ever seen. So this is all going to be fine. But yeah, there was a spreadsheet. There was a lot of like crossing out of people and sort of me saying like, I don't know that I have something for this, or like, yeah, I think this should be like, I had a few visual ideas for how to treat things, but mostly I tried to stay out of the way of that because whatever Joan come up with would be better than like what I had for it. But it was, I think there were conversations and like, oh, I don't really like Charlie Freak that much, and I don't have, so let's not do that. And I think we were like trying to figure out whether or not to do the last two, the reunion albums, how to treat those. And initially, I think it was going to be just the first 7, the great run in the 70s, but it was like, it was too much fun there's, I think, too many characters on those later ones that are fun to talk about. And it was also like, it was a way to tell their whole story, including the kind of return and resurgence. Like you wanted to have lead it up to like sort of basically to the present, or to, 2020 is where it kind of leaves off.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I am sure that everyone asks you this question, but did collaborating together so closely put you in the mind of Walter Becker and Donald Fagen? Who's who?
We haven't asked the who's who before, and I quickly said that Alex is Fagen.
But that's mostly it's not because like I'm the Donald Fagen. It's because you are the Walter Becker, and you have like lived a more interesting life, I think, than I have in a lot of ways.
I maybe did more teenage drugs.
I had
like a couple of years there that were salty.
Yeah, there's only one of us who's ever done cocaine on a boat, and it's not me.
That's
so
true.
I think that's like, if you mentioned that at some point, and that makes you the Walter.
It does make me the Walter.
It's a long time ago. Kids.
Far in the past.
Don't do drugs. But if you're going to do more when you're young, when you're very young, get it out of the way. And
yes.
But I think like I like the idea of it being, even though you're doing a different physical process, I think the book is very much, it does the thing that, it's a third stream is created of information between those two things. And I like that I quote the David Lynch somewhere in the book talking about how writing Twin Peaks with Mark Frost, and he would be like, I would sit at the computer, or it was Mark Frost talking about writing with David Lynch. I'd sit at the computer and David would sit in a chair, and our minds would meet somewhere up by the ceiling. And the author is someone called Lynch Frost. And I feel like there's like, this is a collaboration, like fully, even though I can't paint.
I mean, it feels like the kind of collaboration where you guys are finishing one another's thoughts, and I think that lends itself excellently to the book, and what a fun experience it is to read it. And as I say, it's just this incredible merger of your two amazing minds. Out of curiosity, do you guys have a sense of the personal relationship between Becker and Fagen? I mean, was it warm? Because warm does not seem like a setting that they have.
Yeah, I think it was it was true love. I feel like there was something like I feel like if you're Donald Fagen, it's probably rare that you meet someone who's smarter, darker, sensibility wise, and better than you at music. Like that doesn't happen very often, I assume, when you are a person of that level of intellect and talent. And I think there was a point where, and I feel like they were just such a sensibility match from the beginning, and that the whole Steely Dan thing spins out of them kind of trying to amuse one another. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a certain amount of like, you know, of sort of just a shared perversity of sense of humor and a real sort of, and they, you know, they've talked about all of the, it's like you're meeting a person who has all the same favorite sci-fi authors as you. And like, that probably doesn't happen again that often. And then I think they were probably what we don't know is like, when did he really start to drift away from the project, Walter? Because that did eventually happen. Like it was sort of, it became much more just because of the stuff that Walter was struggling with. I think it seems like it became much more Donald's project by the end. And certainly the images that you have of Gaucho, the making of Gaucho, the last 70s Steely Dan record before they kind of parted ways for a long time. It's Walter's out of the picture because he's recovering from the cab accident that sort of from which this book got its name, and also you know, dealing with with drugs and with like the death of somebody he was in a relationship with. And it leaves Donald to finish this, the most uptight record they've ever made, the most anal retentively produced, like 250 takes of right. You know, of a drum track, and like the one that the you know, that they've literally invented new technology to make things more precise, and just him being just miserable. Like I think it's Rolling Stone like spent some time with him back in at that, or maybe it's like New York Times, something like that. There's a profile of them from this era, and he's just like smoking and just kind of let's mix it again. Like it's just he doesn't, but it's because like at least you had Walter to kind of vibe off of and kind of bounce. And like, even if you hated the studio, hated mixing, you hated sort of like that experience, like at least you could be, you know, making each other laugh. And so I guess the way that we're Becker and Fagen is that it sucks to write a book, and inevitably there's going to come the moment when you're just like miserable, and you're like, so a lot of like, people have asked about the collaboration, but a lot of the most valuable thing about the collaboration for me was being able, we had a standing phone call on like Monday mornings, to check in on, like start the week off, checking in what was going on with Quantum Criminals. And a lot of it was me being like, oh God, I don't know, man, this is really, I don't know what this is. I don't know what I'm doing. And you'd be like, it's going to be great. And like your sort of positivity, like sort of buoyed me through this thing. And the rest of it was kind of sharing a lot of Google images of so many Google images and so many like, look at Kenny Vance's hat. Yes. Look at this guy's hat. Have you seen Jeff Porcaro's hair? Have you seen the drummer's hair? Yeah. Like, it's really like, like there was a fair amount of that, I think, was, you know, was sustaining as well. Yes.
All right. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about the band, if that's okay. So one of the things that I think you really artfully illustrate is that Steely Dan is kind of this hall of mirrors, of paradoxes. And nothing is ever really quite as advertised. And one instance of this phenomenon is the group's relationship to what might be crudely characterized as like highbrow and lowbrow art. So on the one hand, they seem like these jazzbos who are basically slumming in the Luciferian depths of rock and roll. And on the other hand, they seem to really dig these slums. They seem to really take to them. So how do you think the band perceived itself? Are they public intellectuals? Are they satirists? Are they grifters? What's your take?
Well, I mean,
I think all of the above.
That's right? The easy, sure.
Yeah.
That's the yes, they're in various times, I think, perceive themselves different. And I think also present, like there's a fourth option, which is, I mean, maybe this falls under grifters, but like, you know, are they showmen? Are they just entertainers? Are they, you know, like even when they'd stopped touring, like, but especially once they came back, they were very much like, we're just a you know, leathery showbiz survivors. We're a road hardened, tested, you know, because then all they did was tour after, like when they finally came back in the 90s, like they toured forever. But I think they're like, because it's different. I was, last night we went out after the reading, and of course, that's, you end up having a few drinks and arguing about Frank Zappa. That's what that's the glamour of, being on book tour. Mm-hmm. And I think like in Zappa, you very much get that feeling that he was sort of, a composer who is like, I have to play this rock and roll garbage for kids so that I can make a living. And I think that's where I think there's a contempt for the audience that comes from that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that like, that's what, that's why he would, I think, give these songs these really gross, puerile names. Like he'd write some very complicated composition. He's like, but yes, and I have to call it the Cat Litter Box Boogie so that you'll listen to it, you fools. Like, right. I don't think that, I've never get that from Steely Dan.
No.
I think that they just were sort of, they just had this sort of cosmology of influences, and they wanted to sort of to bring it in. But I think they're also, maybe it's just that they're reaching up to jazz from their skill level of being a rock and roll band. And so they're a rock and roll band that tried to sort of play like a jazz band, and then eventually could surround themselves with people who could do almost like what they couldn't, like, I think that's where it comes from. So it's like they're, what I love about them is that there's this aspiration to sort of play something that's beyond your ability and better than you can do. And that, like, I feel like that's what the story, rather than being a story about perfectionism and about being like uptight and sort of driving your musicians too hard or whatever, it's about like, I hear something in my head that I'm not able to execute at my skill level. And so I'm going to bring in someone who can. I can't sing like Michael McDonald, but I have Michael McDonald's phone number.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, that all sounds about right to me, but thank you for ratifying these assumptions. And it's fun to think about Zappa and Michael McDonald, just because they seem fun, especially in the context of Lil George, who I'm like obsessed with. But anyway, so another question I wanted to ask you, and this is something that I find really fascinating. So you make the stipulation in the book, and this is a quote: the high gloss alienation of late 70s Steely Dan records like Gaucho is a prescient preview of the 80s, both sonically and spiritually. But you could never imagine Steely Dan as an active American band in the 1980s, by which I think you mean Steely Dan belongs in some profoundly intrinsic way to the 70s. And I was really thrilled to read this because I have this long gestating but unproven theory that the United States in the 70s was like the single strangest decade in modern history. And so, to put it a different way, the English poet Andrew Marvell wrote about Oliver Cromwell during a similarly fractious historical moment. If these the times, then this must be the man. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about how Becker and Fagan were the men for the 70s.
I was hoping we'd get to Cromwell tonight. I was. Somebody finally brought up Oliver Cromwell in the context of a Steely Dan interview, and it's fitting that it was you. I appreciate that so much. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, right, why them? I think that they had, part of it is they seemed to get what they needed out of the 60s counterculture pretty quickly. And so then you are sort of looking around for something else. I think, like, Fagan writes about like his sort of, formative acid experience. I think it's like 65, like it's really sort of, it's soon. And like, so he's been there and done that. And they've been, they've been arrested at Bard for having drugs and given haircuts in jail and all of that. And like, they've been through the whole ringer of that experience. And then, so I think they're not holding on to anything from the 60s. They're not trying to keep that going into what's happening. And so instead they're like, where are we going next? And we're not really interested. We like jazz and we like rock, but we're not interested in being Chicago, or something like that. And we're also not trying to be like the Mahavishnu Orchestra or something, like where we're kind of, they don't want to do fusion. They don't want to do like jazz rock in that sort of flamboyant kind of way. But you're talking about something sort of like more I think
existentially spiritual.
Yeah, like why these two guys? I mean, I think maybe it's that like the, you know, cynics are the broken clock that's right twice a day. Like if you have a bleak outlook on life, there are certain times. Now I think was like one of those times as well, but like probably like 1972, 73, like looking around from a, you know, with a kind of jaundiced perspective, like there was a lot of evidence that you were right about that. And I think there is, you know, maybe that's part of it, that they just had this dark sensibility that's informed by, you know, all the influences that I've talked about, that's informed by all these sort of, you know, like by Terry Southern and Vladimir Nabokov and all of that. And like that when they encounter the 70s, they're ready for it because they think that most people are full of shit and like all of that. But also like there were young men who seemed like old men.
Yeah, I also wonder about, you know, because they were always focused on both the past and the future, if that made them be able to sort of be in it but not of it in a way that made them kind of embody it as well. That's like,
yeah,
if that makes any sort of time collapsing on itself sense.
It does. I think it does to me, but you know, I don't know. We've established that my brain is mush at this point. I've said it, but like that there's, that they're focused. They're always there. They are sort of both kind of always reaching back to an imagined past that they just missed out on and thinking about like a sci-fi future that's never going to arrive. And they're, you know, which is maybe a good way to be stuck in the middle, you know, like, you know, that and in that moment. But I think too, like I think like this is a hard one because they do really seem like, I think there's also something about being an outsider that really helped them, you know, sort of be these kind of perfect social satirists for that time, because they were New Yorkers working in the kind of free swinging California studio band milieu, and kind of looking at that from an outsider's perspective, even as they sort of wormed their way to the center of it.
And I think the way that they probably clung to each other deepened, they dug their heels further into what their whole thing was too, as a way of staying safe in that environment.
Right. Because you have somebody else to sort of like,
yes.
you can check, you have somebody else who's going to check you on your sensibility. Correct. And who's going to sort of like, you know, hold the line with you. And like, you're not just a, you know, an individual kind of moving through that thing. Right. But yeah, I think they just were, you know, there was a lot going on, and I think they were awake to a lot of what was happening, and they were attuned to and interested in writing about subtle shifts in culture. And so those records end up feeling really prescient and really smart, because they identified things that now feel, you know, really ahead of their time. Like whether it's, you know, kind of writing songs about like putting yourself in the headspace of a mass shooter to write a song feels now like something, you know, it's like at that time that was a really unusual thing in American culture. It didn't happen very often. And they were interested in like what makes somebody do something like that. And thinking about, you know, writing a song at the age of 30 about how you can't talk to a 19-year-old because there's a generation gap between you, even though it's only 10 years. Like that's the thing that they're thinking about in Hey 19, is like how quickly we kind of split apart, you know. And I feel like they just were paying attention to different things, and because they weren't writing, once you kind of cross off like love and like, you know, how hard we're going to rock you tonight as like topics, you have to find something else. It opens up a lot of space for you, because they didn't do that. There's very few Steely Dan love songs, like, and so they were kind of like, you know, ended up writing about different, you know, a range of different stuff.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about them like in comparison to the Eagles, and how the Eagles sort of, you know, really kind of romanticized the 60s and where it all went. So they have like Sad Cafe and Boys of Summer and these songs that are really like, the counterculture, you know. And Steely Dan, meanwhile, it's like, no, this was always going to be this way. It was always headed in this direction. And I always just thought like, wow, that's a kind of skepticism that you don't expect from, I guess, a band that, you know, is kind of in league with the same kind of California groups of the 70s. But anyway, I wanted to ask you about, well, this comes up in the book, and I thought this was really interesting. So there's limited live audio and video footage available, but they're sort of thrilling, if not idiosyncratic. I've watched the My Old School live video that you guys talk about, which is, if you haven't watched it, for the uninitiated, it's really amazing. A lot of times they look like they're hostages. And it's pretty great though. And so I was wondering, like, what do you think the impetus was to like take the band off the road at the height of their popularity when they were such a compelling live act? And do you know anything about what their relationship was to playing live? And it almost feels like, and I think you guys bring this up nicely in the book too, it's like their anonymity was like their superpower. Like, we know these songs, like you hear them and it's like, that's Steely Dan. Could I pick either one of them out of a Police lineup? Probably not.
Right.
Like maybe today, because there's like Dan memes and stuff on Twitter, I feel like people probably more today now know what Donald and Walter look like than they did back in the day. And like Donald has said this, that he used to be able to walk down the street in the 90s and no one would bother him, because I was like, and like now he's kind of like, now he gets stopped for things like how people actually know him. I think there was a lot of like just curmudgeonly guy, Donald Fagen, who was doing something he never intended to be a lead singer, and kind of just got pushed into that position because they sort of got their bluff called, and they were like, look, you're writing these songs for us here at ABC Music Publishing, and like no one's ever going to record them because they're too weird. And so you guys have to, you start a band, record them yourself, like we're calling your bluff. And so they sort of like pushed him into the position of being lead singer. He always felt that he was going to blow out his voice, and like he usually did. And like that's, I'm sure you're, I don't have to tell you like what that is. The fear of that happening is so consuming if that's how you're making your living and doing, night after night. And I think also like they're writing really complicated music, and they, stage monitoring was not at the level that it is today. And so they could never hear themselves, and they were at the mercy of whatever because you're opening for like Black Oak, Arkansas, and like, or they just like, because they toured everywhere for that early period and hated it. And you're opening for Zappa, you're opening for, and so you're not like, you're not getting the best sound guy, it's treatment anyway, because you're the opening band, but like it was just not as good back then. And I think that was a big part of it, that they were not, they're not putting out the product at the high level of purity and clarity that everybody sort of because I think a lot of people struggle with that back then. It's like, that's why the Grateful Dead built the wall of sound, because they were sort of, they couldn't, they wanted to be able to hear every note on every instrument. They wanted a speaker for every string on the Phil Lesh's bass, like it's sort of to like, be able to experience it in its full purity. But so I think it's that, but I think it's also just that they were miserable. Like you read Donald's book and he's miserable now. Like he's miserable today touring. Like that's a whole book about how much he hates being on the road and his fingers hurt and like, all that stuff. Just curmudgeonly. Great book though.
Perhaps you could purchase it at Literati bookstore.
10-Minute Hipsters by Donald Fagen is perhaps available through the illustrious Literati bookstore, and I highly recommend it.
This is actually, like, to get away from the Literati bookstore of it all, something that I did want to ask you about, which you sort of just brought up in your last response, was that they were like super meticulous about their recordings, and I'm guessing that's probably really hard to replicate live, almost to like an obsessive degree. But the subject material that they would often sing about was like just the sheer pointlessness of everything. And so I wanted to kind of get your point of view, and you persuasively compare them to Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm persona. So how do you guys reconcile this outsized effort and exertion in the service of depicting the meaninglessness of it all? Or is that an unfair characterization?
I mean, I think you could definitely take that from it. I think that's a way to look at it. I think I think there's a great empathy there too for the characters that they're writing about, for these people who are caught up in, who it's kind of tossed by fate in these songs. And I feel like that's what I love about Joan's art in this book, is that I feel like it gives these people their humanity in a way that I think that Donald and Walter, without making too big of a deal about it, like sort of sneakily tried to as well. I think that they sort of, they didn't want to seem like they felt for these characters, but I feel like they did on some level, or
right, because there's so much presentation without condemnation. There's almost never any condemnation except for on Haitian divorce, and a little bit, and little. But only a little bit. And so it's which is something you write about, the moral judgment, the onus is upon the listener to make the call, which makes you interface with narratives and characters and in a way that is more immersive than if you're just being told in a song, here's this asshole, he did this thing that was bad, and now we're singing about it.
Right. Like another band would want us to really know that like Mr. LePage is a bad guy.
Absolutely.
Who we shouldn't try to be like, and we should, and instead they wrote about it from the perspective of a guy who is, I think, in league with Mr. LePage, and is kind of like saying, hey, you should go meet this guy. He's really great. Right. But in terms of like what you're saying about like the meticulousness applied to this, I mean, that is really what I love about it, because it's this trying to remove all of the human mess from songs that are about human messiness is an amazing aesthetic goal to set and achieve for yourself, like to the point that you literally invent a drum sampler at a time when that is a very hard thing to like build and code, just because yes, the best drummers in the world are great, but they could be a little more great. They could be just a little. They're like, this is a great bar, and if he could just do that every time. But we know that like even Steve Gadd can't do that, and so we're going to feed it into a computer that we built to literally sort of just take out all of that, and then while at the same time like reveling in imperfection and in human, just self-destructiveness and everything, that every flawed thing about us that makes us who we are. Like, I don't know, I think those two things are separate ideas, that that they just sort of wanted it to be perfect, and this is what they were interested in. But I think that's what the fact that those two things are so oddly complementary like makes these records so great.
Yes. I just to dovetail off of this, Joan, I'd like to ask you a question, because I feel like you render these characters so beautifully and with such humanity and affection, and some of them are just trash people. So congratulations on making me care about them through your representation. Did you have a favorite character to portray? Was there one that was particularly difficult because of how awful they were or how bad their life was?
It was, I think Cousin Dupree is a rough one. That's a real rough one. Mr. LePage is a rough one, but I tackled both of those. I was excited to paint both of them. I think the character that I ended up loving painting the most, it changes, but I think it may be the Holy Man, perhaps, because I painted him in the manner of an odalisque. Which I thought it was a thing that was funny to me, just this sort of happy, jolly man on the couch with the tiny fez. It was very important to imbue everybody with as much humanity as possible and have everybody looking to camera for the very, the vast most part, so that you were, in conversation with them sort of in the same way. It's one of the things. Alice Neal is my favorite painter of all time, and in her portraiture, you have to confront whoever she's depicting, and I wanted to kind of have that be a thing that was happening as well. There was like the dandy of Gamma Chi. There was a perverse joy in depicting the creepiness of everybody. That just the challenge of that was it was also like, how do I make this funny?
Right.
How do I make this something that kind of, I look at it and it kind of makes me laugh and evokes something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I still laugh every time I look at Jill St. John.
Yeah. Jill St. John's got a big head. I painted her with a giant head.
Yeah, it's an Alice in Wonderland
It
version
really
of Jill St.
is.
John. And it would that was not not a direction that I was sort of thinking about for it. But like I think they do have a quality of like a little fantasy illustration, but especially that one. Like it has a Queen of Hearts thing happening, you know.
It's there's something unhinged and deranged about lots of them.
Yeah, I like that one on my other, that's like, I like Clean Willy as well. I was looking at Clean Willy, and it's like he's perfect, like that guy, like it's the guy who's like, you know, the shave is almost too close.
Yes.
Somehow there's like, you really get like a skin tone that's like that skin tone and texture looks like it's from that one, and why they call him Clean Willy.
Yeah,
he's like overly clean. He like smells like white bar soap.
He definitely does, or like aftershave, and in a way that sort of precedes him into a room,
like a medical grade kind of aftershave, like a real serious
barbicide.
Yeah, Barbasol. That's what that's the comb cleaning fluid.
It is the comb cleaning fluid. I don't know about aftershave, but yeah.
We got into the comb cleaning fluid last night, actually, after we took off the after party.
Living. Okay, so another question for you. I know we got to turn it over to the masses of adoring fans who have questions, but I just wanted to ask one more quick one if there's time. So there's these details that crop up in the book that seem so bizarre and so novelistic that they can barely seem true. One of them is that G. Gordon Liddy looms on the edges of their college experience, and they form an early version of the band with Chevy Chase. Skunk Baxter becomes a defense contractor. And like it's like pension-esque, and I'm curious to know, as you were writing the book together, how much did you know going into it, and did any of it take you by surprise? I mean, it's just so weird, and so I was just curious, like, how the discovery was for you both.
Like, some of it is lore that's just kind of out there, right? Like, I think I knew about some of it, and I think I'd sort of authenticated things that I had always heard. Like, people always said the Chevy Chase thing, and it turns out he was not. It was a band with Donald and Walter, but it wasn't Steely Dan necessarily. It wasn't like Steely Dan Mark One, but it was the Leather Canary was the name of one of the bands that they had together, and like, you know,
this nascent thing.
Yeah, I like Donald wore feathers, I believe. He wore costumes on stage. Like, it's a whole thing. It was a different time in his life as well. But yeah, I mean, I think this is just a tribute to really kind of following the thread and kind of going down the rabbit hole. I sort of like, so you just know, like, you have the one little thing where it's like, oh yeah, and like that's what, like, Chino and Daddy G, that's a reference to G. Gordon Liddy, and like that's kind of on the internet. But then to actually go in and be like, why was that, and like find like the fact there's this weird passage in G. Gordon Liddy's career where he's the sheriff of Dutchess County, and like he's responsible for Bard, and like he's sort of coordinates like all of these, you know, but he's bound for the national stage. He's trying to do whatever he can to like kind of get out and do, you know, he wants a position with Nixon, and he wants to sort of move on into that world. And so like his ticket, he's always trying to like make the big score that's going to get him to the, you know, the promoted to out of town, like, you know, and kind of get picked up by the major leagues as a law enforcement official.
Like, I would watch a whole movie about that bumbling G. Gordon
seriously, like I enough
trying to make it
like,
big time.
I mean, look, we have like a White House Plumbers show now about him, but I think we need to go back and do the early life of G. Gordon Liddy when he's
baby
G, little baby, like young G. Gordon Liddy. It's like a Gotham Knights kind of thing. Like, it's like when you show like, this is like what Batman was before, but it's like, a young hot G. Gordon Liddy is the pitch. One out there.
Anybody with a green light?
Yeah, please green light it.
Turn it on.
So I have one question from the audience so far. This is my speak now or forever hold your peace moment for any other audience members who would like to submit questions. Now's the time we're answering them. This person wants to know, given the book's combo of art and prose, which is each of your picks for the best Steely Dan album cover?
I think the best one is Pretzel Logic, and I say that because I think it's the only cover. I mean, you can argue that Asia it does this too, but I think Pretzel Logic a little bit more, where there's more of a hint of what's inside. There's a dialogue, more of a dialogue between the music and the cover itself. It seems like that cover could have been like a Zeppelin cover or something. It's dumb, and I love it. Yeah.
I think that's probably the right answer for that reason. I think that's correct. But I'm just, so that I can say something else to answer the question, I'm going to say, like, I really like Katie Lied, and I think the reason I like it is because it's out of focus. And it's not like photographically, it's not really, and I think that somehow illustrates like what's going on in the music somehow, that it's a little bit, it's always a little bit, you're never going to fully get all the details. You're going to have to fill in the details with your imagination on some level. I mean, some of them are like, yeah, I don't know, like Royal Scam, they've said is the worst album cover of the 70s, except for Can't Buy a Thrill.
Yeah.
Asia, I think, is sort of beautiful in its
Yes.
problematicness, and its kind of its fetishy quality,
Yes.
which is, and is sort of perfectly Dan, because it is aesthetically very pleasing and also sort of troubling.
Yes.
From that perspective, because it's this weird sort of Orientalist image of a woman who's kind of abstracted, but it's also an amazing photograph, like it really and like a striking kind of visual image.
Mm-hmm.
So next question is, have either of you met or consulted with Donald? Is he aware of the book, and what does he think of the whole project?
He's aware of the book. Neither of us have met Don. Neither of us have there are people around us who have been in contact with him, which is how we know he knows. But we have no idea. There's been no word. Nothing yet. No Don yet.
No, yeah, and he's always we did not, he's always sort of said to potential biographers who've contacted him to write about it, he's always said, just write it like we're dead. Even like when Walter was alive, I think that was his answer, like just do it, and don't, So we didn't reach out. People have said, "Oh, Donald will love this." That's what I've heard. I also could,
I wouldn't that be a delight?
Yeah, I mean, I assume he'll hate it, but like, it's like,
but that's fine too.
That it would also
I'm just thrilled that he knows about it.
It would be a representative experience if he hated it and made fun of it. It would be kind of like being made fun of by Henny Youngman or something, like a real classic, like like Don Rickles, like a real sort of getting owned by Donald Fagen in some way. Obviously, yes, it would. I hope that he doesn't hate it, but I would accept that as part of the experience.
Yes.
Next question is, if you were both a Steely Dan character, there's two parts to this. Who would you want to be, and who are you actually?
That's a great framing of that.
God,
question.
That's great. Ooh. Oh. I can say slightly my answer from
the first part.
Yeah,
you know who you are.
Who I am is Jack, and I say that because he's the archetypal. He's like the fool in the tarot deck. He's the archetypal character who makes the same mistakes over and over and over and over and over again, and only tangentially slightly learns and has to keep, repeating things until he figures it out, which is, what it is to be human. Who I would like to be. Oh God.
Who has the best life?
Yeah. Who has the best life? Maybe I'll go holy man. Maybe I'll go, oh no, my rival. Yeah. He wears a hearing aid.
Wait,
I'll be that.
So wait, that's who you would like to be? Or
that's who I would like to be. I would, because like, who are you when you're that guy and you're feared by, like, what's the, I don't know.
Oh, so you'd like to be the rival?
I'd be the rival.
Oh, the guy with the scar across his face and
Yeah.
the hearing. Okay,
Yeah,
so
like
not the guy.
I've lived.
I've
lived.
Oh, right.
And
yeah.
I'm triumphant.
Yeah, you're having sex with this guy's wife, you know, like just
Yeah.
sort of, yeah, like it's, you just take what you want from the world. Like,
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I am Deacon Blues. I am a corny white guy who wishes he was something cooler than that, and has always sort of found that in art because it's something I can't be in life. So that's that part's easy. Who I would like to be, I mean, you know, the guy hunting moray eels by radar on a boat in Glamour Profession, I think seems to have a pretty good, like there's some just one of the rich guys, you know, someone like that.
Who has it easy.
Someone who's got, you know, like it seems like, you know, like the guy in the song Asia has like a sort of a nice hillside retreat of some sort that you go to, ranch above the sea. That sounds very nice. It's mostly, most of my fantasies involve property ownership.
Fair. Yeah. I'm gonna change mine to holy man. I don't really want to be my rival. He's bad.
You want to be enlightened. Yeah.
I want to be enlightened. I want to be on a couch with a fez on. Yeah.
So the next question is for Joan specifically. What intrigues you about Donald and Walter's physical appearances? How do they complement each other visually? And did the way they looked somehow embody or reflect their personality?
Yes. So I've painted Fagin just a ton of times. Not a ton of times, maybe like seven. I've done like 7 or 8 paintings of Fagin throughout time and space. I love their faces so much, and I love they foil each other. They're sort of opposites. You know, Walter's cherubic and seems like this, you know, sort of innocent, glowing, although, you know, we know he's not. And Fagin's features are really pointed. You know, he's got this really fun to paint mouth. He's got just such a great square chin, and the looks he gives are always kind of squinting off into the middle distance. There's something about the two of them that, you know, when you're drawing cartoons or what have you, if you had a dynamic duo, one would be a circle and one would be a square in terms of shapes, and they've kind of got that thing going on. I think they foil each other perfectly and are just delightful. And painting both of their, I had a lot of fun painting hair throughout this book, and painting Walter's long blonde hair was a delight, and Fagin's this was great. So
you had a specific brush.
I had one brush, and I still have the brush. I've moved the brush from Portland, Oregon to London, and I'm moving it back to New York, where I'm moving in a few weeks. And it's this one brush, and when it dies, I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's got bristles that are screwed up just enough to make the hair the way that I need it to be, and it's perfect for beard hair and Michael McDonald beard hair. Yeah, I used that brush on every painting, and yeah, people who paint know about that. When you have just one brush that you've screwed up to the point where it only does one job and nothing else will do the job.
And I believe this will be our last question. What do you make of the Dan Mann contretemps in light of her profound love of the band, as well as her recent work in comics?
Yes. So does everybody know this story? So like that Amy Mann, who blurbed our book, who kindly blurbed our book, friend of the book, Amy Mann.
Yes.
I mean, you tell it because I'm going to screw it up, but like, yeah. Like,
so that story, I'm very lucky to be friends with Amy, and she's wonderful. And she and Fagin are square. Everything is good. The beef has been squashed. So what I think about it is that the beef has been squashed. They've, you know, yeah, they're at peace with each other. What happened was she was going to open for them, and she was very excited, and then the opener changed, and it was a bummer, and there was a kerfuffle, and now everything's okay.
And Donald paid her back supposedly by
Yes.
telling her the true story of Brooklyn owes the charmer under me. The song from Can't Buy a Thrill that is, that's about his their Brooklyn existence. But he told her it's a little bit like how apparently Carly Simon has told Taylor Swift and only Taylor Swift who You're So Vain is about, so that Taylor will carry that when Carly leaves this world, which hopefully will not be for a long time. Taylor will keep that secret,
right?
And she knows who the which one is Warren Beatty and which one is Mick Jagger and whatever, and like so that kind of thing. So Amy got the true facts of the charmer direct from the crooked mouth of Donald Fagen.
All right. And on that note, we have reached the top of the hour. So Alex and Joan, thank you for being with us. Also, Elizabeth, thank you for moderating things. Thank you for joining us at Home with Literati tonight. And thank you to all of our viewers as well. Make sure you buy the book. The link is in the chat on the event listing that brought you here. And of course, you can always come into our store. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.